On a snowy night in Chicago, a little girl sat shivering beneath a street lamp, clutching a worn teddy bear. Her lips trembled as she whispered 6 words that pierced the heart of a stranger. Everyone has a home, except me. A passing millionaire CEO, wealthy, powerful, yet profoundly empty inside, stopped in his tracks. He could have kept walking. He could have looked away, as so many others had. But in that fragile moment, something inside him broke open. What followed was a journey not of fortune, but of compassion, where a single choice reshaped the meaning of family, love, and home. This story will stay with you long after it ends. Stay with us. And if your heart believes in second chances, subscribe to Loss and Healing, because some stories are not just told, they are lived, and they can change us forever. It was one of those Chicago evenings when the snow fell like a curtain, swallowing up the noise of the city and leaving only the sound of the wind against buildings and the muffled hum of car engines. The streetlights glowed dimly through the flurries, painting the world in shades of amber and red. Boots sloshed through icy puddles, and each breath turned to mist that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. Inside a black SUV parked near a bakery, the warmth of the heater fogged the glass, creating a cocoon of comfort against the biting cold. Behind the wheel sat Henry Whitmore, a man whose name meant success to almost everyone but himself. Henry had just ended another hollow call with a board member. They had spoken about quarterly projections, about layoffs, about strategies to increase numbers that already looked obscene on paper. He disconnected the Bluetooth with a tap, but the ghost of that conversation clung to the silence. A text appeared on his dashboard screen, reminding him of the investor gala scheduled for the evening. He dismissed it with a swipe of his finger. He was not tired in the physical sense, but in the way a man grows weary when nothing he does fills the emptiness inside. His tailored suit was perfect, his smile often rehearsed. His apartment high above the city gleamed with glass and steel, but none of it made him feel alive anymore. His eyes wandered lazily across the snowy street toward the bakery's doorway, where warm golden light spilled onto the sidewalk. And that was when he noticed her. A tiny figure sat beneath the street lamp, her knees tucked to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around a threadbare teddy bear. She could not have been more than 6 years old. Her thin yellow coat looked inadequate against the chill, its seams frayed from wear. One of her boots hung loose, untied. She whispered something into the bear's ear, though her lips barely moved. Her cheeks glowed red from the cold, and her eyes, large, dark, steady-held, a kind of quiet resilience that made Henry lean forward without realizing it. He rolled his window down just a crack, and the cold air rushed in like a slap, sharp and unrelenting. "Hey," he called softly, "are you okay?" The little girl lifted her head. She did not flinch, did not startle. Her gaze was steady, almost older than her years. Then, in a voice so fragile it nearly disappeared into the snow, she whispered, "Everyone has a home, except me." The word struck Henry with more force than any boardroom accusation or financial crisis ever had. His chest tightened, and the warmth of his car felt suddenly false. Here he was, a man who owned properties in 3 cities, who could buy comfort in any form, yet confronted with a child who claimed no home at all, he felt smaller than ever. The girl rose slowly, brushing snow from her teddy as if it were precious cargo. Without waiting for him to respond, she turned and began to walk. Something inside Henry hesitated, that old instinct of detachment whispering that this was none of his business. He had spent years perfecting the art of distance, of keeping human messiness outside his perfectly controlled life. But another part of him he thought had long since gone dormant, moved him before reason could intervene.
Beautiful day.
His hand found the door handle, and he stepped into the storm. The cold bit through his coat, his polished shoes sank into slush, and yet he followed. The girl walked with a strange steadiness, as though she had walked these streets many times before. She did not run, nor did she glance back to see if he was behind her. Henry quickened his pace until he matched her small footsteps. "What's your name?" he asked gently, his voice cracking slightly. Without turning, she answered, "Nora." He swallowed. "You should not be out here alone, Nora." She replied simply, "I am not. I am going home." Her small hand pointed toward a shadowed doorway beneath a flight of rusted stairs. A metal door sat there, battered by years of neglect. "That is where my aunt lives," she explained. "I live there too, kind of." Henry studied the door, unease stirring in him. "Does she know you are out here?" Nora shrugged. "She works late. I do not think she saw me leave." She paused then, turning to look at him with those dark eyes again. "Are you someone who keeps walking, or someone who helps?" Henry froze. The question landed heavier than the snow piling on the ground. For years, he had been the man who kept walking, not out of cruelty, but out of habit, a product of a life built on detachment. But here, in the alley's silence, with a child waiting for his answer, he realized the choice was no longer abstract. "I guess we are about to find out," he murmured. Nora gave a faint nod, as though that answer was good enough for now, and pushed open the heavy door. Warm air, tinged with mildew, rushed out, carrying with it the weight of an entirely different world. Henry hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, following her into a place that would begin to dismantle everything he thought he knew about home. The corridor smelled faintly of fried onions and damp carpet. The tiles stuck faintly to the soles of his expensive shoes. Nora walked as if this were nothing unusual, guiding him with quiet familiarity. At the end of the hallway, she stopped at a door and knocked twice before pulling a key from a string around her neck. The hinges groaned as she pushed it open. A small apartment greeted them, tired but lived in. A crocheted blanket draped over a couch, a space heater rattled weakly in the corner, and crayons littered the table. In the midst of this, a young woman with paint smudges on her wrist turned, startled by Henry's presence. "Nora?" she asked, her voice low and weary. "Who is this?" Before Henry could explain, Nora answered with disarming simplicity. "This is Henry. He followed me." Henry raised his hand gently. She was outside in the cold. I was concerned. The woman crossed her arms, protective, exhaustion etched into her features. She introduced herself as Claire, Nora's aunt, the one who had carried the weight of raising her since tragedy had stolen Nora's mother and abandonment had erased her father. Henry glanced around again. The apartment was small, worn, nothing like the sterile luxury of his high-rise. Yet it had something his own place lacked. A pulse. A heartbeat that came from the bonds between those who endured together. Nora offered him the last cookie in a tin, and when he knelt to accept it, her small act of generosity unraveled him more than any grand gesture could. He realized, as he looked into her tired but determined eyes, that the night was not about chance. It was an invitation to choose between walking away or finally staying. The next morning, long before the city shook itself awake, Henry found himself restless.
Hi there.
He had returned to his penthouse after leaving Claire and Nora the night before, but sleep had been impossible. The quiet of his immaculate home only echoed what he had seen in that small apartment. The cracked tiles, the frayed blanket, the little girl's thin coat. The question she had asked him, "Are you someone who keeps walking or someone who helps kept circling his mind like an echo that refused to fade?" By dawn, he had made up his mind. He stopped by a bakery, ordered more than he knew they could eat, and drove across the slush-covered streets with a grocery bag in one hand and a boxed heater tucked under the other. His driver offered to carry the load, but Henry shook his head. This was something he needed to do alone. When he knocked on the familiar door, Claire appeared, her hair still tied up in a bun, wearing an oversized sweater. She blinked in surprise when she saw him. "I brought breakfast," he said, lifting the bag, then tilted the heater toward her. "And this might help." Her brow arched in suspicion, but she stepped aside. "Persistent," she muttered. "I'll give you that." Nora came bounding into the room, barefoot, a crayon in her hand. Her eyes lit up as soon as she saw him. "You came back!" Henry smiled, setting the heater down near the outlet. "Told you I would." He plugged it in, and at once the air began to shift. It was not much, but the warmth was stronger than the old rattling unit in the corner. Claire crossed her arms, watching him carefully. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "I wanted to." They sat around the small kitchen table, mismatched chairs creaking under them. Nora devoured a muffin with delight, her cheeks stuffed with crumbs. Henry handed her a small bottle of orange juice, and she grinned as if he had given her treasure. Claire poured instant coffee into chipped mugs, sliding one toward him. For Henry, it was a scene unlike anything in his usual life of boardrooms and catered dinners, and yet it felt more honest than anything he had known in years. As they talked, Henry's gaze drifted toward the refrigerator. There, held up by a flower-shaped magnet, was a crinkled drawing. 3 figures stood beneath a navy sky filled with uneven yellow stars. One figure had long hair, another was small, and the third was tall with a square head marked with the letter H. Nora's imagination had already placed him in her world. Claire noticed him looking. She drew that after you left yesterday, she said softly. She thinks fast, feels faster. Henry swallowed hard, not trusting himself to speak. He had not been in a child's drawing since his own childhood memories, now blurred with time. Seeing himself in that sky unsettled him not with pity, but with a strange, fragile sense of belonging. Nora came rushing over then, clutching a sketchbook. "Do you want to see my book?" she asked eagerly. Henry accepted it with care, as if it were something precious. Page after page revealed homes. Houses on hills, by lakes, with glowing windows. Some filled with people, others just her and a dog. Again and again, the tall, suited figure appeared beside her. Sometimes faceless, sometimes smiling, always present. She draws homes she has never had, Claire explained from behind him. Sometimes I think she's building one for herself, page by page. Henry turned the final sheet and found it blank. She left that one empty, Claire said. For later, when she knows how it ends. He closed the book gently, feeling the weight of it in his hands. May I hold on to this, just for a little while? Claire's eyes narrowed in surprise. Why? Because, he said quietly, if I am going to help, I need to understand what home means to her. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then she nodded once, a subtle gesture of trust. When Henry rose to leave, Nora hugged him suddenly, her small arms barely reaching around his waist. "Thank you for breakfast," she whispered. He knelt to meet her gaze. "Thank you for sharing it with me." As he stepped back into the hallway, the cold air rushed at him, but something inside stayed warm. That night, in his glass-walled office, he opened the sketchbook again and turned to the blank page at the back. For a long time, he stared at it, then slowly picked up a pen. He drew a small house beneath a sky of stars and wrote one word beside it: hope. In that moment, Henry realized it was not enough to visit, not enough to provide muffins and heaters. He had spent his life mastering transactions, but this was not a transaction. It was an invitation to commit. He could not erase Nora's pain, nor undo years of struggle for Claire, but he could choose to stay. And for the first time in decades, the choice felt right. The next time he returned, he did not come only with breakfast. He came with keys. When Henry returned a few days later, he was not carrying muffins or just another heater. This time, in his hand was a manila envelope with a set of keys. Claire opened the door cautiously, her arms crossed as if bracing herself for whatever he was about to say. "Keys to what?" she asked, suspicion clear in her voice. Henry held the envelope steady. "A safe, warm apartment. It is in a building my company owns. 2 bedrooms fully furnished, heat that works, secure entry. You would be 2 blocks from a park, upstairs from a library. Nora's school is in the top 10 in the district. It is not charity. I am offering you both a reset." Claire's jaw tightened. Her voice was not angry, just guarded. "We are not charity cases." "I know," Henry replied calmly. "And I am not treating you like one. But Nora should not have to imagine what safety feels like. She should live it." From the living room, Nora peeked around the corner, teddy bear pressed to her chest. "Did you bring more muffins?" she asked hopefully. Henry chuckled. "Not today, kiddo. Something better." Claire glanced at the envelope again, then back at Nora. She did not reach for it immediately. Instead, Henry simply placed it on the table and stepped back. "You can say no," he said softly. "This is your decision." It took her a full day before she called. "We will try it," she said, her tone measured. By the end of the week, they had moved.
This is a beautiful
The new
evening.
apartment was on the 3rd floor of a brick building with freshly painted trim and wide windows that let in morning light. It was not luxurious by Henry's standards, but it was clean, bright, and above all, safe. Nora's bedroom had a bed big enough for her to stretch out, shelves for her books and art supplies, and a window where the sun poured in like warmth made visible. On the second day, Henry arrived with a long cardboard box. Claire arched an eyebrow. "You moving in?" she teased, though the edge in her voice was still there. "Not quite," Henry said, carrying it to Nora's room. "Close your eyes." Nora obeyed eagerly, bouncing on her new bed. Henry opened the box and pulled out glow-in-the-dark stars. One by one, he placed them on the ceiling, shaping constellations with careful precision. When he told her to look, she gasped. "It is my sky!" she whispered, her face glowing in the pale light. Henry smiled. "Now you will always have stars above you, even when it rains." Nora threw her arms around him, small and fierce. Claire stood in the hallway watching, her hand pressed against her chest. She did not say anything, but the shimmer in her eyes betrayed what words could not. The days that followed began to weave themselves into something Henry never expected: a rhythm. He rearranged his calendar to walk Nora home from school twice a week. On those walks, she told him about spelling tests, about the friend who shared her crayons, about the worlds she built in her drawings.
Yes, it truly
She spoke of wanting to be a scientist or an astronaut or maybe both. He listened, and for once in his life, every word mattered more than any meeting he had ever attended. Claire, too, began to shift. She picked up part-time work at a community art studio, guiding children in painting murals. Henry stopped by once, standing quietly in the doorway. He watched how she laughed with the kids, how she leaned close to help them blend colors, how she seemed to belong in that space in a way he envied. When she finally noticed him, she looked startled, then amused. "Did not know CEOs had time for sidewalk murals," she said playfully. "Some do," he answered. "At least the ones who figure out better priorities." They sat on a bench afterward, sipping coffee. The silence between them was not heavy, it was comfortable, the kind of quiet that felt like understanding. One afternoon, while Henry sat cross-legged on Nora's bedroom floor, helping her cut paper stars for a school project, his phone buzzed. It was his assistant, calling about a major investor threatening to pull out of a deal. Normally, he would have jumped into action, suit pressed, tie straight, ready to put out fires. But in that moment, he looked at the phone, then at Nora, her small fingers gripping the scissors, her brow furrowed in concentration. He turned the phone off. "Aren't you going to answer?" she asked, curious. "Nope," he said, handing her the next piece of paper. "They can wait. This is more important." Her smile was so radiant, it felt like the room itself brightened. From the doorway, Claire watched. Her arms folded, but her lips curved in a smile she had not worn in years. Later that evening, after grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, Henry helped Nora brush her teeth and read her a story before tucking her beneath her ceiling full of stars. Her eyes were heavy, her voice soft. "Will you still be here when I wake up?" she asked. Henry's breath caught. He brushed her hair gently from her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "I will." And as he sat beside her until she drifted into sleep, the glow of those tiny stars above them felt like a promise-stone he intended to keep. Life had just begun to settle into something that resembled peace when the knock came. It was late, long after dinner, the sound abrupt against the fragile calm of their evening. Claire opened the door cautiously, only to freeze when she saw the man standing there. Jason. His hair was slicked back as if an attempt at respectability could erase years of absence. He wore a cheap suit that hung awkwardly on his frame, and beneath one arm, he carried a folder. His smile was half smug, half predatory. "Well," he said, glancing past Claire into the apartment, "looks like you've been busy, sis." Okay. Claire's voice turned to steel. "What do you want, Jason?" "I want what's mine," he said smoothly, his gaze sliding toward Nora, who clung to the edge of Henry's shirt from behind. "My daughter."
"You've got this."
Henry stood slowly, steadying himself before speaking. "You cannot be serious," Claire snapped. "You left before she was even born." Jason shrugged, his smirk never wavering. "People change. I've got a stable job now. Legal representation." Claire laughed bitterly, the sound sharp. "Stable job? You mean you shaved and hired a lawyer who will say anything for a paycheck?" Jason's eyes narrowed as he turned toward Henry. "And who are you supposed to be, Daddy Warbucks?" Henry did not flinch. "You need to leave," he said firmly. Jason's smirk deepened. "I'll be back with a court order. Let's see how a judge feels about some billionaire playing house with someone else's kid." He turned, his shoes clicking like threats against the hallway floor. That night, Nora could not sleep. She curled beneath her blanket, her teddy tucked under her chin, but her eyes remained wide and fearful. Henry sat beside her, holding her small hand. "Do I have to go with him?" she whispered. "No," Henry said firmly. "No one is taking you anywhere. Even if he says he's my dad." Henry swallowed hard, a knot tightening in his chest. "Being a dad is not about who shows up last. It is about who stays. and I am not going anywhere.
Grapes.
The next morning, Henry hired a private investigator. By noon, a file sat on his desk thick with Jason's history, skipped parole check-ins, involvement with a loan shark operation, suspicions of trafficking. Claire's hands shook as she read through it. He's dangerous. He's also being watched, Henry said calmly. I have already contacted a family law attorney. We will be ready. Even so, Jason's shadow lingered. Nora's drawings grew darker, jagged figures and broken houses filling the pages that once held constellations. She began biting her nails, waking from bad dreams, and shrinking at sudden noises. The fragile security she had begun to feel was cracking. One afternoon, Henry found an unmarked envelope in his private mail. Inside was a photo of Nora playing at the park, clearly taken without their knowledge. His blood ran cold. He handed the picture to his lawyer and doubled security at their building that very day. He arranged escorts for school pickup and made sure Nora never walked alone again. A few days later, Henry came home late to find Nora at his kitchen island, drawing with a colored pencil. Claire was napping after a long shift. Nora slid the paper across to him. It was another drawing of the three of them standing outside their apartment. But this time, beneath the tall figure, she had scrawled one word in red crayon. Dad. Henry stared, his throat tightening. He folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. I will earn it, he whispered to himself. I promise. When the court date arrived, the courthouse felt colder than any Chicago winter. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The marble floors echoed with footsteps, and everything smelled faintly of disinfectant. Henry sat on a bench with Claire and Nora. She wore a soft blue dress dotted with tiny stars, clutching her teddy bear as though it could shield her from the weight of the day. Jason entered with his lawyer, slick and self-assured. He carried himself like a man already convinced of victory. Claire stiffened at the sight of him, and Henry placed a steadying hand on her arm. Inside the courtroom, Jason's attorney spoke first, spinning a story of reform. He spoke of Jason's desire to reconnect, of his supposed stability, and waved around a lease for a one-bedroom apartment as if it proved anything. The law does not favor replacement, the lawyer insisted. Claire's attorney countered with years of absence, criminal records, and the photograph of Nora taken in secret. But it was Henry whom the judge turned to next. When he rose, the room grew silent. He did not hold notes or speak like a lawyer. He spoke from the weight of nights spent reading bedtime stories, mornings walking to school, afternoons making paper stars. Family is not built by blood, he said steadily. It is built by presence. Nora asked me once if I would still be there when she woke up. Every day since, I have answered that question with my actions. Jason Moore had every chance to be her father. He did not call when she was sick. He did not show up when she needed comfort. He did not stay. Biology does not wipe away tears or build trust. Love does. The courtroom was silent, the words lingering like truth too heavy to dismiss. Then the judge asked softly, would the child like to speak? Claire began to object, but Nora stood. Her knees trembled, but her voice was steady. I don't remember him, she said, glancing briefly at Jason. He never came, but he did. She turned toward Henry, her voice breaking. He stayed. He listens. He makes me feel safe, like I belong. The judge leaned forward. And what do you want, Nora? Her answer was a whisper, but it filled the room. I want to stay home. At that moment, a plainclothes officer handed the judge a file. The contents revealed Jason's deeper involvement in narcotics distribution. His smirk vanished, his face draining of color. The judge's gavel struck with finality. Custody remained with Claire. Jason's visitation rights were suspended indefinitely. Henry was recognized as a guardian and trusted figure of authority in Nora's life. Nora dropped her teddy and rushed into Henry's arms, her small body trembling with relief rather than fear. He held her tightly, his eyes stinging. For the first time, the word home felt real. The days after the court ruling felt like the first breath after a long storm. The tension that had shadowed their lives began to lift, slowly but surely. For the first time in months, Nora went to bed without checking the hallway twice. Claire stopped waking at every creak in the night, and Henry, though still living between two worlds, felt more at home in that modest apartment than he ever had in his towering penthouse overlooking the skyline. A few weeks later, Henry oversaw the renovation of a top-floor unit in a historic brick building near the city's botanical gardens. It was not ostentatious like his old condo. nor sterile like his office suites. It had warmth in its very bone-scrounged molding that whispered of history, wide windows that let sunlight pour in, and a kitchen meant for laughter as much as cooking. When Claire and Nora stepped inside for the first time, something softened in both of them. Their shoulders relaxed, their eyes brightened. This place did not just look like a home, it felt like one. Nora's new bedroom was everything she had once tried to capture in her drawings. The walls were painted lavender. A small reading nook with fairy lights waited by the window, and shelves stood ready for her books and art supplies. But what made her gasp was the ceiling. Henry had installed fiber optic lights, tiny pinpricks that shimmered like constellations across a deep blue sky. Some blinked gently, others glowed steady. It was her own universe above her bed. She spun beneath the glow, eyes wide with wonder. "Is it real?" she whispered. Henry stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, smiling. "It's yours," he said simply. From behind him, Claire stepped closer, resting her chin briefly on his shoulder. "She's going to remember this forever." "So will I," Henry replied, his voice low but sure. Life did not suddenly become perfect. Instead, it became ordinary in the most beautiful ways. Grocery runs with mismatched shopping lists. Socks disappearing in the wash. Nora spilling juice and giggling when Henry tried clumsily to clean it up. He learned to braid her hair after watching tutorial videos and failing twice before she finally declared with pride, "Not bad." Claire began painting again in a sunny corner of the living room, her canvases filling slowly with color. She sold 3 pieces in a local gallery, and Henry attended, clapping as though it were the world's greatest triumph. Sunday mornings turned into pancake rituals. Nora named them Galaxy Breakfasts because Henry arranged blueberries and whipped cream into constellations on their plates. Claire laughed so often now that Henry sometimes paused whatever he was, doing emails, calls, numbers, scrolling across his laptop just to listen. One afternoon, Nora brought home a paper from school. It was for Parents and Guardians Day. She handed it to Henry without much expression, but he noticed how her breath caught as he read it. The date clashed with a board meeting, a shareholders call, and a scheduled media interview. None of it mattered. "I will be there," he told her without hesitation. The way her face lit up made rescheduling an entire boardroom worth every second. At the event, Nora introduced him proudly. "This is my kind of dad," she told her classmates, "but not in a weird way." The children laughed and Henry smiled, his chest tightening with something that felt like joy. Later, one of the other parents leaned toward him. "She really loves you, you know." He only nodded because words would have been too small. That evening, Claire printed a photo from the event, Nora grinning ear to ear. Henry crouched beside her, both wearing paper crowns shaped like stars. She framed it and hung it in the hallway near the front door. Their first family photo. That night, when Henry sat on the couch reading, Claire curled beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. The television hummed quietly in the background, but neither of them paid attention. In Nora's room, the fiber optic stars blinked softly as she whispered to her teddy before drifting into sleep. Claire broke the silence. "She told me today that she feels lucky now." Henry closed his book, marking his page. "She deserves to feel lucky." Claire looked at him, her eyes gentle. "You made that happen." He shook his head slightly. "No, we did." Claire smiled faintly, brushing her hand against his. "I used to think there were only 2 kinds of people in the world, the ones who leave and the ones who get left behind. But maybe there's a third kind, the ones who stay, even when it's hard." Henry leaned in, pressing his lips gently to her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. Later that night, as he passed by Nora's door, he paused. Through the wood, he could hear her sleepy voice, soft but clear. "Do you think this could last forever?" Claire's reply came a moment later, calm and steady. "I think, sweetheart, this is just the beginning." The morning the call came, Henry was in the kitchen flipping pancakes while Nora drizzled syrup into swirling galaxies on her plate. Claire, still wrapped in her robe, stood by the window sipping her coffee, the sunlight catching in her hair. The air felt calm, filled with the rhythm of domestic life that once seemed impossible for them to hold. But peace can be fragile, and it trembled when Henry's phone buzzed. His attorney's voice was short and direct. Jason had been arrested again, this time caught in a DEA sting. The charges were heavy. Distribution of fentanyl-laced pills, laundering through a storefront, violations stacked on top of old parole breaches. The judge had wasted no time, 15 years, no parole. Henry ended the call and turned toward Claire. She read the news in his face before he spoke. "It's over," he said simply. "He's gone for a long time." Claire exhaled, shoulders sinking as if she had just laid down a weight she had been carrying for years. In the living room, Nora hummed to herself as she drew. Henry knelt beside her, his voice soft. "Sweetheart, I have something to tell you. Jason won't be coming back. Not ever." Nora's pencil stilled. She looked up at him, eyes steady, then nodded. Slowly, she turned her drawing toward him. 3 figures stood beneath a sky of Starsher, Claire, and Henry. "Good," she whispered. "Now we can stay happy." Spring came in gentle waves, softening the sharp edges of winter. Trees bloomed along the sidewalks, laughter returned to parks, and breezes carried the scent of magnolia. Inside their apartment, the season seemed to take root early. Nora thrived, her drawings now filled with galaxies and people holding hands beneath starlit skies. Henry was no longer a visitor, but part of their rhythm. He walked her to school on Mondays, brought cocoa on Thursdays, taught her how to fold paper airplanes on weekends. Claire had loosened too, laughter bubbling more easily, a glow of ease settling into her face. One afternoon, Nora watched Henry and Claire dancing in the kitchen, music floating from an old speaker, pancakes forgotten on the stove. She tilted her head and asked, "Are you two going to get married, or what?" Claire flushed, but Henry only smiled. They did not wait long. In early June, under the canopy of the botanical gardens they visited every Sunday, Henry and Claire exchanged vows before a small circle of friends who had become family. Nora stood between them as flower girl, her dress shimmering with sewn stars. She giggled as she tossed petals into the air, squealing every time one landed in Henry's hair. When the vows were spoken, it was Nora who tugged their hands together for the kiss. That night, their living room filled with balloons, vanilla cake, and laughter. Claire danced barefoot with Nora to an old jazz record, her hair loose, her eyes bright. Henry stood at the edge of the room, a ring shining on his finger, and thought to himself, "This is it. This is what I never knew I wanted." Later, when the guests had gone and the city was quiet, Henry peeked into Nora's room. The fiber optic stars glowed overhead, casting soft light across her bed. She was awake, holding a folded piece of paper. "I have something for you," she whispered. Henry sat on the edge of her bed and unfolded the drawing. It showed a house, and beneath it 3 figures holding hands beneath the stars. She looked at him, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Now we all have a home," she said. His throat tightened, a tear sliding silently down his cheek as he kissed her forehead. "You gave it to us first," he whispered. "We just made it real." When he stepped into the hallway, Claire was waiting with 2 mugs of tea. "She gave you the picture?" she asked softly. Henry nodded. "I've already framed it in my mind." They stood together, listening to Nora's quiet laughter drifting from her room, the stars above her bed glowing like they had been hung there by love itself. On the wall nearby, another picture Nora had pinned in her looping handwriting read, "Family isn't where you start, it's where you choose to stay." And so they stayed. Sometimes the greatest transformations begin not with a grand plan, but with a single step. A man who once measured his worth by the size of his bank account found himself undone by 6 fragile words whispered by a child in the snow. "Everyone has a home, except me." That moment cracked open the walls around his heart, and from it grew something no fortune could ever buy belonging. Henry had spent years chasing success, yet he was more lost than ever until Nora reminded him of what really mattered. By choosing to stop, by choosing to stay, he discovered that love is not a transaction. It is a commitment written in the quiet hours of everyday life. It is in walking a child to school, in listening to their fears, in being there at bedtime, and in the morning after. It is in the courage to show up when it would be easier to walk away. Claire, who had carried the weight of loss for so long, learned that she did not have to do it alone. Nora, who once believed she was forgotten, discovered that her voice mattered and her drawings could become real. And Henry, who once thought his life was complete in its emptiness, finally understood that true wealth is measured not in numbers, but in moments shared, in trust earned, and in promises kept. This story is not just about one family. It is a reminder that all of us, no matter our past, have the power to choose differently. We can be the ones who stay. We can be the ones who make a home, not by walls and windows, but by love and presence. If this story stirred something in your heart, let it remind you that healing often comes in the most unexpected places through kindness, through courage, through connection. And if you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that tomorrow is always a gift, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Loss and Healing and join a community where every story is a chance to find light in the dark, to discover hope where it once seemed lost, and to remember that family is not only where you start, it is where you choose to stay. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can give is not money, not advice, not fleeting comfort, but simply ourselves. And that gift, once given, can change everything.